Fidel Castro's name echoes through history as a symbol of revolution and defiance. He was a charismatic leader who challenged the global order. Castro led Cuba for over 5 decades. He transformed it from a playground for the wealthy to a socialist state. His actions resonated worldwide, inspiring both admiration and controversy. Castro's revolution was more than just a political upheaval. It was a social and cultural earthquake that reshaped Cuban society. This duality, the blend of triumph and tragedy, defines Fidel Castro's complex legacy. Fidel Castro's defiance of the United States, the world's superpower, is a defining aspect of his legacy. He dared to stand up to American imperialism. Castro nationalized American-owned businesses and forged alliances with the Soviet Union. These actions enraged the US government and led to decades of hostility.
The CIA, under orders to eliminate Castro, launched numerous assassination attempts. These plots ranged from exploding cigars to poisoned diving suits, yet Castro managed to outmaneuver and survive them all. His willingness to confront a superpower, despite the risks, cemented his status as a global icon.
Fidel Castro's path to becoming a revolutionary icon was not preordained. He was born in 1926 in Biran, Cuba, into a family of relative affluence. His father, Angel Castro, was a successful sugarcane farmer. This provided young Fidel with a comfortable upbringing and access to quality education. Castro pursued law at the University of Havana, where he excelled academically. It was during his university years that he developed a keen interest in politics. Castro's early activism revealed his inclination toward radical solutions. He began to organize a clandestine movement, recruiting like-minded individuals who shared his revolutionary fervor. In 1953, Fidel Castro, along with his brother Raúl and a small group of revolutionaries, decided to take decisive action against the Batista regime. They targeted the Moncada barracks, a military garrison in Santiago de Cuba. The attack, planned for July 26th, was intended to spark a nationwide uprising. The assault on the Moncada barracks, however, ended in failure. Many were killed, and those who survived, including Fidel and Raúl, were captured.
During my trial, I delivered a powerful speech that would become legendary. My words, "History will absolve me," resonated with many Cubans who shared my yearning for change. This release paved the way for the next chapter in the Cuban Revolution.
Forced into exile in Mexico, Fidel Castro continued his revolutionary activities. He formed the 26th of July movement, named after the date of the Moncada barracks attack. During this time, he met Ernesto Che Guevara, an Argentine doctor whose revolutionary zeal matched his own.
Guevara would become a key figure in the Cuban Revolution, serving as Castro's close confidant and military strategist.
In 1956, Castro, along with 81 rebels, including Guevara, set sail for Cuba aboard the Granma. They faced immediate attacks from Batista's forces and were forced to retreat into the Sierra Maestra Mountains.
Despite facing harsh conditions and relentless pursuit by the Cuban army, Castro and his guerrilla fighters persevered. Finally, on January 1, 1959, Batista fled Cuba, marking a decisive victory for Castro and his forces.
Fidel Castro's rise to power sent shockwaves through Washington. His revolutionary government, with its socialist leanings and nationalization policies, was seen as a threat to US interests in the region. The Cold War was at its peak, and the presence of a communist ally just 90 miles from Florida was unacceptable to the United States. Thus began a long and covert campaign to eliminate Castro and his regime.
The Central Intelligence Agency was tasked with neutralizing the Cuban leader. The agency devised a series of elaborate and often outlandish assassination plots. These attempts on Castro's life became a dark chapter in the history of US-Cuban relations. However, the Cuban leader, with his intelligence network and personal security measures, managed to evade every single attempt on his life.
In the early 1960s, the Kennedy administration, frustrated by the failure of previous attempts to eliminate Castro, launched a more comprehensive covert operation codenamed Operation Mongoose. This program, overseen by Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, aimed to destabilize the Cuban government through a combination of sabotage, psychological warfare, and assassination attempts.
Operation Mongoose was a multifaceted campaign that employed a wide range of tactics. The CIA orchestrated sabotage operations targeting key infrastructure in Cuba, including power plants, bridges, and factories. They also engaged in propaganda efforts to undermine Castro's popularity, disseminating anti-communist leaflets and broadcasting anti-Castro radio programs into Cuba. Despite these elaborate and often ruthless efforts, Operation Mongoose failed to achieve its primary objective of toppling Castro's regime. The Cuban leader, surrounded by loyal followers and increasingly wary of U.S. intentions, proved to be a remarkably elusive target. The failure of Operation Mongoose marked a turning point in U.S.-Cuban relations, leading to a period of heightened tensions and mistrust.
The numerous attempts on Fidel Castro's life, each one a testament to the CIA's determination to remove him from power, only served to solidify his image as a man who could not be killed.
With every failed plot, Castro's legend grew, both in Cuba and abroad.
He became a symbol of defiance, a revolutionary leader who could stare down the world's superpower and emerge unscathed.
Castro himself seemed to revel in his ability to outsmart his enemies.
He often joked about the assassination attempts, claiming that the CIA had provided him with a lifetime's worth of stories.
This bravado, whether genuine or calculated, further enhanced his image as a fearless leader who could not be intimidated. Despite the very real dangers he faced, Fidel Castro managed to survive every attempt on his life. This remarkable feat cemented his place in history as one of the 20th century's most enduring and enigmatic figures.
The alliance between Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara was a pivotal moment in the Cuban Revolution.
Their paths first crossed in Mexico City in 1955. Castro, exiled from Cuba after the failed Moncada barracks attack, was organizing a new revolutionary movement.
Guevara, an Argentine doctor, had already developed a strong anti-imperialist sentiment fueled by his travels throughout Latin America.
Guevara was immediately drawn to Castro's charisma and revolutionary fervor. He recognized in Castro a leader who possessed the determination and strategic acumen to overthrow Batista's dictatorship.
Castro, in turn, was impressed by Guevara's intellect, his passion for social justice, and his willingness to fight for his beliefs. This period of intense intellectual exchange and shared purpose forged a deep bond between the two men, shaping the course of the Cuban Revolution. After months of planning and preparation in Mexico, Castro, Guevara, and their small band of revolutionaries embarked on their daring mission to liberate Cuba.
They landed on the island's shores in December 1956, aboard the now iconic Granma yacht.
Faced with immediate danger from Batista's forces, they retreated into the Sierra Maestra Mountains, where they launched their guerrilla campaign.
Guevara's military expertise and strategic mind proved essential during the Cuban Revolution. He quickly rose through the ranks, becoming one of Castro's most trusted commanders.
Guevara played a key role in training the rebel army, instilling discipline, and developing effective guerrilla tactics. Beyond his military contributions, Guevara also played a significant role in shaping the revolutionary government's ideology and policies. His image would become synonymous with revolution and the struggle against oppression.
Despite our shared commitment to the Cuban Revolution, differences in ideology and temperament emerged between Castro and me. While Castro faced the practical challenges of governing a nation under constant threat from the United States, in 1965, Guevara left Cuba to pursue his vision of global revolution. Isolated, outnumbered, and lacking local support, he was captured and executed by Bolivian forces in 1967.
Despite his short time in Cuba, Che Guevara left an indelible mark on the nation and its people. Guevara's legacy transcended national boundaries, inspiring generations of revolutionaries and activists worldwide. With the revolution triumphant, Fidel Castro embarked on a sweeping transformation of Cuban society, guided by socialist principles.
Castro's first acts included the nationalization of key industries and businesses, infuriating the United States and setting the stage for decades of economic embargoes.
Land reform was another cornerstone, seizing large estates and redistributing them to peasants.
These radical reforms were met with mixed reactions, with supporters praising social justice efforts and critics warning of economic hardship.
The stage was set for a long and complex struggle to build a socialist society in the face of formidable challenges.
Despite the US embargo, the Cuban Revolution achieved remarkable successes in education and healthcare. Castro made education and healthcare top priorities.
A massive literacy campaign dramatically increased literacy rates. Healthcare underwent a similar transformation. Castro established a universal healthcare system. These achievements contributed to Castro's enduring popularity. Section 3, the price of progress. Castro's social reforms brought benefits in education and healthcare, but at a cost.
Political freedoms were restricted, and dissent was met with repression.
Despite social achievements, Cuba became a one-party state where opposition was not tolerated. The government controlled the media, silencing critical voices.
Independent journalists faced censorship, imprisonment, or exile. This created a climate of fear and self-censorship.
The Cuban government's human rights record drew international condemnation. The United States' response to Fidel Castro's socialist revolution was swift and uncompromising.
In 1960, the Eisenhower administration imposed a trade embargo on Cuba, severing economic ties.
The embargo's impact on the Cuban economy was immediate and devastating.
The sudden loss of access to American markets sent shockwaves through the Cuban economy.
The Cuban people faced a drastically different reality marked by scarcity and economic hardship.
Castro denounced the embargo as economic warfare, designed to strangle the Cuban economy.
He turned to the Soviet Union for support, aligning Cuba with the Eastern Bloc. Section 2. Survival under the embargo. The US embargo forced Cuba to adopt a unique and challenging economic model. Deprived of Western markets, Cuba relied on the Soviet Union for trade.
The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 dealt a devastating blow to the Cuban economy.
With the loss of Soviet subsidies, Cuba faced an unprecedented economic crisis. Fuel shortages crippled transportation, factories shut down, and food rations were drastically reduced.
Despite the crisis, the Cuban people displayed remarkable resilience and ingenuity. Bicycles became the primary mode of transportation in urban areas. Urban agriculture flourished as people turned vacant lots into vegetable gardens.
Doctors and scientists developed innovative treatments using locally sourced herbs. The Cuban government implemented economic reforms, promoting tourism and private enterprise.
These reforms were essential for ensuring the survival of the Cuban economy.
The resilience and adaptability of the Cuban people are a testament to their enduring spirit. The US embargo's impact on Cuba extended far beyond the economic realm. It profoundly shaped Cuban society, fostering a unique national identity characterized by resilience and resourcefulness.
Generations of Cubans grew up under the shadow of the embargo, its presence a constant reminder of geopolitical forces.
The embargo became a rallying cry for Cuban patriotism and anti-imperialist sentiment. It reinforced the perception of the United States as a hostile force.
This narrative of resistance shaped our nation's worldview and foreign policy.
The embargo also had a profound impact on Cuban culture. It fostered a sense of isolation from the outside world. Fidel Castro's long reign cast a long shadow over Cuba and the world stage. He was hailed by some as a champion of the oppressed and reviled by others as a ruthless dictator.
His leadership transformed Cuba from a playground for the wealthy to a beacon of social justice, albeit controversial.
Castro's supporters viewed him as a David confronting the American Goliath, challenging US imperialism. They pointed to achievements in education, healthcare, and social welfare, improving lives of millions.
His defiance of the United States resonated with many as a symbol of resistance against oppression.
However, critics painted a starkly different picture, condemning his government's authoritarian tendencies. They condemned the suppression of political dissent and human rights violations.
Critics argued that social progress came at the cost of individual liberties and democratic principles.
The exodus of Cubans seeking refuge from political persecution and economic hardship highlighted deep divisions.
Castro's ability to inspire both admiration and animosity reflected the multifaceted nature of his rule.
He was a master communicator, captivating audiences with his fiery rhetoric and unwavering belief in his cause. His image, with olive green fatigues and cigar, became a symbol of revolution and defiance. Fidel Castro's Cuba was a study in contrasts, a society where remarkable social progress coexisted with a deeply entrenched authoritarian system.
These achievements were often overshadowed by the government's tight grip on power and suppression of fundamental freedoms.
Significant strides in education and healthcare became a source of national pride.
Social programs improved the standard of living for many Cubans.
However, political dissent was ruthlessly suppressed.
Freedom of speech and the press were severely restricted.
The Cuban people lived in a society where expressing dissenting views could have dire consequences.
This duality defined the Cuban experience under Fidel Castro's rule.
Fidel Castro's influence extended far beyond the shores of his island nation. He became a global icon, a symbol of revolution, anti-imperialism, and the struggle for a more just world order.
Castro's Cuba played an active role in international affairs, providing military and medical assistance.
Castro's commitment to international solidarity cemented his status as a champion of the underdog.
However, Castro's legacy remains deeply contested, reflecting the complexities of his rule.
Fidel Castro's death in 2016 marked the end of an era, but the debate over his legacy continues. Fidel Castro's commitment to international solidarity extended far beyond rhetoric. He saw Cuba's revolution as part of a global struggle against imperialism and colonialism. Africa, in the throes of decolonization, became a focal point for Cuba's interventionist foreign policy.
Castro believed Cuba had a moral obligation to support liberation movements and combat Western influence. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Cuba provided military training and support to African liberation movements.
This involvement, often covert, highlighted Castro's willingness to project Cuban power far beyond the Caribbean. Cuban soldiers and doctors, facing difficult conditions, became symbols of Cuba's commitment to international solidarity. Cuba's most significant military intervention in Africa occurred in Angola, a former Portuguese colony plunged into civil war in 1975. The conflict escalated into a proxy war, with the Soviet Union and Cuba backing the MPLA, while the US and South Africa supported rival factions.
Castro's decision to send Cuban troops was pivotal. Thousands of Cuban soldiers equipped with Soviet weaponry bolstered the MPLA's forces. The intervention secured the MPLA's victory and established it as the ruling government.
The war lasted over 2 decades, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. Cuban troops remained until 1988, defending the MPLA government. The war took a heavy toll on Cuba, both in human life and economic resources.
Cuba's intervention had far-reaching consequences. It solidified Castro's image as a staunch ally of socialist movements. It heightened Cold War tensions, challenging US interests in Africa. The conflict left a legacy of instability and division in Angola.
Fidel Castro's presence on the world stage was impossible to ignore. He was a beacon of revolution and a staunch advocate for social justice. His legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and tragedy.
Castro's Cuba became a symbol of resistance against imperialism. His commitment to education and healthcare transformed Cuba.
However, these achievements coexisted with a rigid political system.
The collapse of the Soviet Union brought economic hardship. Yet, the spirit of innovation flourished, and a unique Cuban identity emerged.
Fidel Castro's legacy defies easy categorization. He was a man of contradictions, a revolutionary who both uplifted and oppressed.